Rain writes 1,000 little letters across the rows of glass. It tap-taps, then pauses, then gathers itself into longer strokes that bead and run, tracing paths down shoulders of flasks and catching in the hollows of stoppers. Tonight, the potion shop breathes in the weather and exhales a slow steam. A small cauldron on the back shelf breathes a sweet herb smoke into the air, and lamps burn low with a careful, domestic light. If this evening suits you, step in and let the sound of it settle you. Stay for more like this if you find your thoughts unclenching as you listen. Mara is at the center of movement, though she moves little enough to be noticed in the way an old clock keeps time. Small, steady adjustments rather than a show of motion. Her hands are the sort that remember the shape of things. The creases of her palms know where a stopper should sit, how a thread will hold, when a seam should be left visible because it tells a story. She pads along the worn threshold, feeling with her feet the little snag that has bothered her for a week, a board that has swelled and caught the edge of slippers, and makes a mental note to plane it tomorrow. Tonight there are more immediate cares. The shop is a room folded into itself. Shelves lean like patient friends, each shelf a row of little bottles, flasks with long necks that gather rain on their shoulders, stout vials with heavy glass bungs, vials whose corks have been waxed and wax-sealed many times and show the imprints of fingers. Labels are neat ovals, some handwritten, and a few with tiny, stitched patches of cloth tied around the neck where the ink has run. Memory in sticky notes and in the glass itself. There is a curtained window at the front, an awning that usually keeps the worst of the weather off the threshold. It hangs now, the edge fraying where last autumn's wind decided to take a bite. A small brazier glows low in its corner, its heat held in a tin bowl, a kettle perched beside it for quick cuppas. A cat, pale, solid, with a single dark smudge over one ear, moves like a quiet punctuation between the workbench and the stove, rubbing her head against the leg of the counter as if to mark it with something softer than ink. Mara checks stoppers. She lifts one flask to the lamplight and watches how the rain-splashed room refracts in the curve of its belly. A hint of lemon oil from the cauldron touches her nose. Something balsamic, too. Rosemary, or maybe a sprig of juniper. The glass is a little cool under her palm, and for a moment she holds it like a thing that needs to be coaxed back into telling its story. The shop is a place of small rituals. Tightening a stopper, dipping a thread in wax, pressing a patch until the oils are transferred. The work is not hurried. It is an act of tending. Outside, the rain is insistent. It makes the roofs sing. It nudges at gutters. It comes against the awning in a steady, familiar rhythm. Inside, people arrive in ones and twos, because those who live near this little shop know. The evening's a time for mending as much as for buying. A night for tending things that are tired. There is something about rain that invites such gatherings. Perhaps the world feels kinder when it is quiet and wet, when hands need to do and voices are spared the strain of reaching too far. The herb woman comes first, sleeves rolled, cheeks washed the color of beetroot. She sets a paper bundle down on the counter with the sort of care reserved for living things. Sprigs of dried lavender, a fist of thyme still green as if it refuses to go fully into sleep, twine wound into a neat coil. She hums as she moves, a low sound that might be a tune or might be a memory. Mara offers her a warmed cloth and a cup. The herb woman smiles and tucks her fingers around the mug, fingers stained with leaf sap and clay. An elder arrives next, her steps slow but sure, bearing a jar of sugared plums wrapped in a soft cloth. She speaks rarely and precisely. Her stories are short, the sort that fall like small stones into the water and send a ring outward. She tells Mara, in a voice like the rustle of old pages, that she found an old label inside a box of letters today, the kind of thing that makes a life look tidy from the outside. She offers the plums and a proverb. Visible mending lasts longer than hidden repair. Everyone knows what she means without asking. Apprenticeship is a sustained, gentle pressure in this place. Young Caro is a neat-handed girl whose fingers still carry the ink smudge of practice. She has been sweeping planings from the plane and picking up stoppers all evening. Where she moves, there is a breath of concentrated attention. She watches Mara the way a seed watches the sun. Jonah, newer still, keeps his toolkit by his foot. His hands are damp from the rain and smell faintly of soap. He makes small errors that Mara corrects with a touch, a word, the adjustment of his wrist. They do not speak much. The language here is pattern and touch. How much wax to draw along a thread? How hard to press a ring into a grommet so it will hold but not tear? Then the joiner comes, named Tom, with a satchel of tools that hang quiet and assured from his shoulder. He sets down his plane and looks at the threshold with the kind of eye that reads wood like a book. A neighbor with a jangling pocket of oddments appears too. Brass hoops, a few lengths of leather, a tin that used to be something else. He drops his treasure on the counter like a small offering. The cat, suddenly very interested, pads to the pile and sniffs, then retires to the rung of a stool to observe. It is during the ritual of making tea. The kettle sings soft. Steam rises and scent settles into every crack, that the two modest faults are discovered. A student may discover a tear by the stippling of their awareness. In a shop, faults make themselves known by the way ordinary things behave differently. Jonah lifts a flask to refill a simple vial. The stopper, which had been snug in the neck, gives with a tiny, wet sigh of displacement. A thread of moisture traces a line down the glass like a pale tear. It is not dramatic, it is merely stubborn. Mara sets the flask down and, with practiced fingers, wipes the place. She holds the stopper under the lamp, examining the brittle lip, and the small crack reveals itself, hair-fine and petal-shaped, running along the glass where the depression meets the mouth. It may have been there for many storms. It may have been the slight misfit of a hurried hand. Whatever the cause, it asks for attention. At the same time, Tom runs his hand along the threshold and lifts his eyebrow. The board catches on his boot, and he presses his thumb to the grain where moisture had swollen the edge into a complaint. It is the sort of thing that was not urgent until now, the kind of fault that becomes ceremonial when friends gather to tend it, planing down the swollen bit, measuring for a replacement, easing the edge so slippers will pass without hesitation. The awning outside is frayed, where rain finds its way past the canvas. A small tear by the corner lets in a spray that puddles on the inside sill during heavier downpours. There is no catastrophe here, only a series of invitations. Mend the flask, smooth the threshold, patch the awning so that the rain will make a softer sound on the cloth. We'll mind it, Mara says, not loud, but with the weight of assurance. Her voice is like the rest of her movements, simple, certain. She sets the cracked flask on a cloth and takes the small bottle of sealing resin from the shelf. It is not a cure in the loud sense. There is no spell that will knit the glass like skin. Rather, they will seal, they will bind, they will make the damage legible as repair. The stitch will be visible. the patch will be a little brighter than the cloth it covers. They will choose materials that sing together. Tea circulates, a little bowl of sugared plums sliced to share, a hunk of oatcake for the apprentices, 2 small saucers of savory paste the elder insists is good for grounding. They work with the sort of silence that is full of sound. The plane shaving wood, the mallet's soft taps, the needles whisper through canvas. Jonah learns to wax the thread with a steady back and forth. The wax gleams like a faint promise as it draws across the cord. Caro holds a grommet while Tom sets it with a quiet strike that makes the tiny ring nestle into the cloth. Mending, here, is not an attempt to hide the wound. It is to show it as an accrued thing, a history that will be visible. Mara chooses a length of canvas for the awning patch that is a slightly different shade, because a mended thing that is exactly the same as before loses the conversation it once had. She cuts the cloth with care. The shears make a short, crisp sound like a punctuation. When she threads the needle, she uses a double strand of waxed linen and presses the knot flat with her thumbnail. Stitch so that it will hold, but stitch so that it will read, she says to Caro, and Caro nods, eyes intent. The apprentice's first attempts are halting. Jonah's hands, eager, pull too tight. The thread puckers the fabric. Mara takes his fingers and guides the motion, slow like the turning of an hourglass. She demonstrates the angle, the pressure, a small twist that keeps the loop open and flexible. He tries again. The needle slides through with less resistance. The cloth lies flatter. There, Mara whispers. The cat lifts its head to the sound and then resumes its purr, a low rolling accompaniment to the rhythm of needle and breath. Repair of glass is a ceremony of patience. They do not heat the cracked flask or pretend to make it whole in one fierce motion. Instead, they clean the edges, warm them just enough to coax away any dirt, and prepare a sealing compound that is mostly resin with a touch of powdered glass to meet the old material on its own terms. Tom brings a small file. He uses it like a surgeon's steady instrument, removing burrs and rounding the jagged lip so nothing will cut the hand that next touches it. The resin is applied in thin layers, each layer allowed to catch and harden, and with every pass the crack becomes less an absence and more an inscription. Throughout the work, there are soft stories exchanged, little lessons tucked into sentences like mustard seeds. The elder reminisces about a traveling merchant who once traded a cracked compass for a pot of lavender. He said a cracked compass made the best company. It had learned to read the world with a little more care. The herb woman chuckles. And did he ever find his way? Someone asks, and the elder's eyes brighten. He did. He took the long roads, she says, and kept better company for it. The neighbor with brass hoops supplies a piece that will help, a small silvered ring that can be fitted as a collar around the neck of the cracked flask to support the area where the fracture runs. It is an old practice, and the ring will not pretend the glass has no scar. Instead, it will hold the weakness steady, and when light catches at certain angles, the ring will throw a thin line of reflection along the crack like a seam of silver. The ring is fitted with care. Tom files its inner lip. Mara polishes its face until it is almost soft to look at, and Caro holds the flask so the ring may slide into place. These acts teach as they mend. Caro learns to recognize the voice of a material, how a canvas will grumble if the stitch is too tight, how a piece of glass sings a different note when warmed, how an old thread will betray its age in a way a new one will not. Jonah learns that haste can be patient but clumsy, that to steady one's wrist is to steady a little economy of motion. Tom, who is older and quieter, tells a small story about a bench he once made that had a knot the size of a horse's eye. He learned then to work with what the wood offered rather than against it. They learn by doing, and the doing is slow and considerate. Outside, the rain takes a different rhythm. A steady hush now, an umbrella of sound that makes the world thinner, bringing everything inwards. The lamps throw pools of amber across the shelves. The flasks drink the light and send it out altered, so that a clear liquid can look green at one angle and the color of old honey at another. A bottle that had sat dull takes on a new liveness when a patch of light slides across it. The repaired edge becomes a declaration in the language of shine. Somewhere in the shop's corner, an instrument of distillation glints. A narrow-necked retort sends up a thread of steam that perfumes the air with the scent of orange peel and crushed bay. The aroma is enough to make the apprentices pause and sigh. There is a small, private magic to these smells. Nothing boisterous, nothing that promises miracles. Only the steady comfort of a room being tended. They are the sort of scents that carry memory. The herb woman suggests a sprig to add to the cauldron to steady the resin's temper, and Mara agrees. The steam lifts, and for a moment everyone breathes in like a chord being tuned. As the patching goes on, the shop becomes a landscape of small noises. The grating whisper of the plane, the soft slap of cloth as it's smoothed, the faint chime when a ring is set, the cats purr like a low metronome. It is intimate work, hands within reach, fingers sometimes touching in the way of shared tasks, elbows brushing as they pass a tool. There is comfort here that is not sentimental. It is the knowledge that one will be there to pull the thread tight when another's fingers falter. A small, bright moment arrives when Caro, having watched the others for weeks, accomplishes a clean shave on a little board, intended to replace the warped threshold slat. Her plane makes a thin, curling shavings that fall like pale pages, and when she sets the board in the place, the threshold becomes a gentle slope rather than a lip. The way she stands back, cheeks flushed with the pleasure of exactitude, is almost like a child who has climbed a fence for the first time and found the view satisfying. Tom murmurs approval, and the elder nods as one who recognizes craft. The awning patch is more complex. The tear is near the corner, where the weight of rain concentrates. They choose a cloth of a warmer shade, the canvas slightly waxed, and decide to set brass grommets to reinforce the edge. The neighbors' hoops find their purpose. The brass rings are set into the cloth with a small, rhythmic strike. The sound of each set grommet is like the click of tiny coins being placed into a small offering box. Jonah learns where to rest his palm to give the grommet the right pressure so it will not twist. He succeeds, and the grommet seats like an eye closing on a face. There is a moment when they test the patched panel. Mara steps to the window and draws the cloth aside. Rain meets the stitched patch and beads, and runs in a slightly different cadence. The air at the sill is cooler for a breath, and a small spray that had puddled before now lays along the threshold and drains away. The light passes through the patch differently. Where the cloth is a shade warmer, the shop glows with a comfortable amber pause. It is not a triumph so much as an acknowledgment. Patches have been made, and the shop will keep breathing. Then, just as the kettle is about to sing again, and the apprentices move to tidying the workbench, there is a sound at the door that is not part of their small-made music. A knock, not a hurried one, not worried, but patient and slightly tremulous, as if the hand that struck it had been soaked in rain and therefore had changed its gait. The bell above the door gives a tired, bright little ring. The cat lifts its head, ears pricked, and pads towards the entrance with the habit of a creature that knows the sound of every footstep that comes to this room. Mara rests her palm on the counter for a moment and tilts her chin in the direction of the door. A shadow pauses in the wet of the threshold, a shape too large for a parcel and too small for a cart. The rain outlines a figure in the doorway. It is the kind of silhouette that suggests travel. Shoulders squared against weather, a collar upturned, hair damp. The stranger stands with a small parcel tucked under their arm, their other hand rubbing a sleeve as though they have done that gesture all evening without thinking. "Come in," Mara says, and her invitation is an ember warmed by shared flame. The stranger steps over the threshold, water darkening the hem of a coat, and the bell announces arrival in a sound that the shop answers with the warmth of a lamp that seems to lift a little in brightness. The cat weaves around the traveler's legs, curious for the new scent. The herb woman offers a towel that they drape over shoulders with an ease born of long practice. The towel smells faintly of lemon and rosemary. The traveler's parcel is light, wrapped in oilcloth, the edges softened with water. They unstop at the top just enough to tuck a hand inside and retrieve something small. A tin of something preserved, perhaps, or a folded note. Their eyes, when they lift them to the faces gathered, are tired in a way that asks both for nothing and for everything. They do not ask for cure or miracle. They ask for the basic courtesy of a cup of tea and a patch of warm floor where feet can unmake their day's stiffness. There is an unspoken exchange. Mara moves as if to offer a stool. Tom makes room on the bench. The apprentices set down their tools. The cracked flask sits on the cloth where it has been resting, unfinished. The threshold board waits for the final trimming. The patched awning hangs mostly secure, but still needs the last round of stitches, so wind will not lift it the next storm. The traveler holds their parcel and looks around, taking in the neat arrays of labels and bottles, the jars with their tied sprigs, the waxed thread waiting on a spool. The shop smells like everything it is: lemon, resin, wood, the green edge of time. The rain is still speaking outside, but it has learned to be a patient narrator rather than an alarm. Mara takes the traveler's cup, pours tea from the kettle that has finally come to full song, and sets it between their palms like a small conversation. The steam rises, and the traveler breathes it in, as if measuring the world through the warmth. They rest their chin on the rim for a moment, and let the shop settle them. The apprentices watch in a kind of reverence. The simple act of pouring tea becomes for them a lesson in hospitality. Not grand, not performative, but exacting. Tea is held in small palms. A saucer receives crumbs. A seat is offered because someone else might need it later. The cracked flask, meanwhile, seems to watch the doorway. The ring that supports it is half-seated. A thin layer of resin has caught and set around the fracture, but needs the last gentle burnish to be considered finished. Jonah moves toward it with a small brush. His fingers tremble very slightly, small like a wind across a surface. Mara's palm steadies his wrist and, without speaking, shows him how to smooth the resin until it takes the light without hiding the meat of old and new. He exhales the way people do when they know they have performed a small, delicate thing. Outside, rain swales in wider arms. The sound of it shifts, and for a breath the shop seems to be listening. The traveler sets their cup down and, with a cautious smile, asks whether there's a place to stay the night. Mara's eyes meet the apprentice's. There is always a place, if one remembers how to make a place by moving the world a little to accommodate. There are blankets folded on a high shelf for emergencies, soft floor mats that can be unrolled, a quiet corner already known to the cat. Hospitality here is ritual and improvisation in equal measure. As the others begin to make room for the traveler's rest, Jonah is still at the bench, smoothing the resin. He lifts the brush and sees, in the glass's surface, the reflection of the lamplight and the rain-smeared street beyond. And, in that narrow band of reflected light, he imagines a thin thread of silver where the crack meets the ring. The effect is small and subtle. It is like the first indecisive stitch on a repair that will later be admired. It is enough to make him grin in a way that is almost boyish. Mara looks up and sees this small mirth, and allows herself a smile that is almost a secret between colleagues. She turns to the traveler and says something about roads and weather. Not a story to explain their presence, but a shared observation that puts the stranger in the circle without question. The elder produces a small square of cake wrapped in cloth, and the herb woman offers a sprig to tuck behind an ear. These are simple gifts, and in the exchange there is a binding as old as the shop itself. To be cared for by touch and small commodities, to be given shelter when rain makes the rest of the world less certain. They do not hurry. The shop's time is not counted by transit, but by the pace of things that settle. They will finish the threshold in the morning's softer light, perhaps. They will set the last burnish on the resin when hands are warm. For now, the shop is a harbor, an arrangement of bodies, tools, heat, and quiet that together keep the traveler safe from the storm. The lamp throws long, restful shadows across the shelves. The cat curls at the traveler's feet. Yet, even in the comfort, there is the sense of a work not quite finished. The awning still flaps slightly in the wind, and the plane sits with a shaving caught in its mouth. The cracked flask, though supported, will bear its scar and the silver ring as a truth to be admired later. The threshold waits for one final, careful planing. The traveler's parcel remains unopened, an invitation balanced between them and whatever they intend to reveal. The room is full of things paused mid-act, the sweep of a hand to clear dust, the half-taken sip of tea, the breath before a sentence is started. It is in that pregnant space that someone at the window, a passer-by perhaps, draws back the curtain and sees how the light within makes the patched cloth glow like a small promise. Outside the glass, rain continues its patient scrim, turning the street into a watercolor of lamps and wet stone. Inside, a kettle hisses softly, as if to remind them of the small, steady fires that keep the world habitable. Jonah feels the weight of all this and, for a flicker, senses the whole of his apprenticeship like a long road whose first gate he has only just passed. A wind gusts. The bell above the door tinkles again, not at the sound of a new arrival, but as if the shop itself has struck a note to mark a shift. The apprentices look to Mara, whose face is calm. She nods almost imperceptibly and asks Tom to see to the threshold while she helps finish the resin. The herb woman gathers the towels, and the elder tidies the cake into its cloth. The traveler folds their hands, feeling the place around them settle into a role that includes them now. Guest, witness, bearer of unknown things. Outside, the rain finds a rhythm within which all other sounds can make sense. They move as a team now, each attending to the task nearest. Jonah steadies the glass as Mara brings the final cloth. The ring is seated with the softest of taps. Caro takes a spare spool to wind the old thread in a way that makes it easier to use the next time. The warmth of the brazier draws a little closer. The cat, satisfied, leaps to a shelf and tucks herself into the hollow of a shawl, eyes half closed like a person listening to a book read softly. And then, as a final small interruption, a quick sniff of air turns into the faint, almost shy sound of someone calling a name outside. A child's voice, perhaps, or a neighbor checking for a candle left in a window. It is the kind of sound that makes everyone look towards the door in a way that is not startling but anticipatory. The bell rings again, and with it the pressure of choices. To answer fully, to leave a task undone for a moment, to extend the circle a degree wider. Mara moves to the door, hair damp at the nape, hand on the latch. She breathes in the smells of the room, resin and tea and thyme, and takes a quick, practical look at the patchwork of tasks spread across the benches. Her fingers brush the edge of the cracked flask as she goes. Jonah, watching, keeps his hand near the mallet should the ring need a gentle encouragement. The door opens on the rain and the blurred lane beyond. A figure stands under the awning's not quite sealed corner, wrapped in a coat and holding something small and wrapped in oilcloth. A parcel that seems to hum with its own quiet. The rain has a way of concentrating attention. It filters the world down to essentials. In that narrowed circle, Mara recognizes a face that is not immediately known, but carries the outline of someone who has been traveling for a long time. Their eyes are reflective in the lamplight. They lift the parcel a fraction as if to offer, but their hand pauses. The moment is patient and full at once, and in it the shop and its occupants hold their breath, not in alarm, but in the careful, attentive way one does when a new stitch is about to be made. Jonah's hand tightens slightly on the mallet. Caro folds her fingers into her lap. The elder straightens the cloth around her jar of plums. Tom stands with the plane balanced on its edge. The cat opens an eye and blinks slowly, as if to say, "All right." Mara steps forward and draws the stranger beneath the lamp, and the rain sounds like a soft percussion on the glass as they cross the threshold. The parcel is turned just enough to reveal a corner of the paper, and for a breath the room leans forward, listening for what will be offered, what will be asked, what will belong now to the shop's story. The parcel is untied with a careful, habitual movement, as if unwrapping might wake something that prefers to rest. The oilcloth makes a faint, paper scratch sound when the traveler folds it back. Inside lies a narrow flask, no taller than a thumb, its glass clouded with age and a hairline fracture that arcs like a small crescent along its side. A faded label clings to the shoulder, the ink smudged with rain, letters almost swallowed by time. The traveler cradles it as though it were both heavy and light. For a moment their fingers do not quite match the way the light reads the glass. "It belonged to my mother," they say. Voice held low enough the shop leans in to listen. "She used it for—" They stop, uncertain whether the thing needs naming. Mara nods, and that small assent is enough. Naming is less necessary than tending. They set the bottle on the cloth that still holds the earlier cracked flask. The room narrows its focus to two small flaws: the half-seated ring that supports the shop's own scar, and this new, private crescent that asks for steadiness. Mara puts a palm over the traveler's for a heartbeat, not to estrange the object from its owner, but to say, "We will keep your thing whole in the way we can." The traveler breathes out, a soft surrender to the room's rhythm, and folds themselves into the nearest chair, palms warmed by the cup of tea still steaming between their hands. Jonah fetches the tray of fine sand and a soft brush. The ritual is slightly different with this bottle. Its fracture runs along more delicate glass, the lip of the neck thinner than the shop's stout vial. Tom examines it, lifting it nearer the lamplight, the way a reader holds a page to catch the right angle. "It's old glass," he murmurs, "blown with an uneven throat. The fracture is shallow but proud." He says it almost as if praising a stubborn animal. Caro leans in, eager, and Mara instructs her to prepare a thinner layer of resin, a compound with more oil, heated gently until it runs like honey, while Jonah steadies a small crescent of cork to support the bottle's ring of weakness. The apprentice's hands are steadier now for the many small tasks earlier in the evening. Mara guides Jonah's wrist into the motion of applying the resin. Not a flood, not a pick, but a measured glide, a line drawn like a promise. The brush trembles at first, but the glass waits. They build the repair in increments, each pass of resin left to cure until it gathers a matte bloom and then a soft sheen. The ring from the neighbor's oddments, slim, silvered, slightly dented, is too large for the neck. Tom files it on the inner lip until it slips over the curve like a halo finding its place. They set it, give it a whisper of mallet tap, and the small sound the metal makes in settling is almost reverent. The repair is not a taking away of the break. It is a keeping of the break in a way that honors what has been. While Jonah works, the traveler watches without speaking. Sometimes their eyes blink slowly at a memory that arrives on its own like a visitor through an unlatched gate. Mara's touch is minimal. She prefers to show rather than to lecture. Her hands move to adjust the torch, to warm the resin in a spoon, to breathe on the glass when the edges need a gentler coalescence. Caro, who only hours before had been set to sweeping up plane shavings, now threads a strand of golded silk through the hole in an old stopper, a decorative measure that will show rather than hide the mended seam. "A stitch not to hide," Mara said earlier, but to decorate the story. The silk will be a bright, small flourish. Outside, the rain softens to a fine, shivering mist. The streetlights become drowned stars. Inside the shop, the lamp seems to draw closer, the brazier's breath warming the air. The kettle settles into a hush now. Its job done, it releases a single, satisfied sigh. The distillation apparatus murmurs on the back shelf, and the steam carries the scent of citrus and bay like a gentle benediction. The cat pads across the threshold and curls into a warm crescent where the traveler's boots have been placed, content with the new smell and the safe presence. The awning is tested again. Mara steps to the curtained window, drawing the recently mended cloth aside to let the rain press at its patch. Drops gather and bead where the waxed thread has been set. The new grommet takes the strain without fuss, and the water runs in a steady seam to the sill, where it now drains properly into a shallow channel Tom has planed into the wood. He hums as he finishes the last sweep of the plane, the sound almost a laugh in tone. The threshold no longer snags. Caro's replacement slat fits with the same humble satisfaction a person experiences when a shoe slips on without catching. The traveler's bottle, done enough to be carried without it worrying the hand, fits into a small leather case that Mara finds on a peg. The case, lined with wool, is christened with a ribbon of the same silk used on the stopper. The traveler fastens it with fingers that tremble on the knot, and then, because gratitude here is done by the measure of smallness, hands Mara a folded scrap of paper. "If you have a lot of work like this," they say, "I may be able to bring more. There's a cottage beyond the ford." The sentence folds into itself. Mara accepts the paper but does not pry. The shop's work is not a ledger, it is a practice of reciprocity. While the repairs finish, the apprentices tidy the benches with an economy learned from necessity. Tools are returned to racks, cloths rinsed and hung, wax warmed and stored in small fluted jars. The elder unwraps another plum and slices it so the sweetness can be shared. The herb woman produces a little pot of preserved lemon peel, cracked with sugar and oil, which she offers in a small spoon. The traveler accepts and closes their eyes at the taste, an involuntary response to something both foreign and familiar. Conversation, when it comes, slips between practiced hands. Talk of a road's bad ford, the weather's impending turn, the best method to cure a certain kind of bruise in apple fruit. These are the sorts of exchanges that stitch together communities. Night grows thicker. The lamps are trimmed so the light warms rather than glares. A low bell of the town rings somewhere distant, the sound curling in like an answering thread to the rain. The shop becomes a vessel of small heat sources. The brazier, the lamp's own reflected glow in flasks like warm coins. Shadows rest like old companions. The traveler's breathing eases. The apprentices take turns rolling out the blankets into a small, neat bed in the corner beneath the shelves where no bottle will be disturbed. A woolen throw, the elder's offering, is folded over the traveler's legs. The cat hops up and settles on that throw as though the warmth belonged to a larger, softer thing. At some point between the final burnish on resin and the grommet's last seat, Mara takes the hourglass from the shelf. It is a small, domestic thing, not ornamental, but necessary, a way to measure the time of a kettle or of a short, deliberate pause between tasks. She turns it, and in a voice so low the apprentices must lean forward to hear, she recites something like a blessing, not in the religious sense, but as a mantra of the trade. Keep light where you need it. Mend so you may remember. The words are less instruction than a seal. Jonah, who did not know the phrase before coming to the shop, tucks it away like a pebble in a pocket. Morning is still some hours away. The world has thickened into a safe clause of time. Yet the evening's work has a slow completion that requires no dramatic untying. Threads gather into coils. The last of the tea is poured into small cups and passed around like an understanding. Someone knows to lay a saucer of crumbs beside the traveler's bed for the cat, who may wake hungry in the night. The shop holds itself in a posture of readiness, the readiness of a room that expects to receive what comes without surprise. In the depth of the night, the traveler stirs, turning like a person waking from a small dream of movement. They fold the case with the mended bottle carefully, and, with a hand that is now steadier, leave the scrap of paper, which Mara had placed inside the lid of a jar to read again later, on the counter. The note is simple, a thank you in a careful hand, and a folded coin tucked beneath the fold. The coin is old and worn, its face nearly smoothed away by journeys. They also leave a tiny, dried sprig of something, perhaps lavender, perhaps a herb the traveler had carried for their mother. It rests like a secret offering. When morning comes, it does not so much arrive as unbutton itself from the dark. The rain has moved into a lighter mood. It taps at the window in a steady, bright rhythm that says the sky will allow some part of the day to be held. Dawn slips through the awning's edge as a thin, cool finger of light. Mara wakes with the sort of slow competency that comes from nights spent in a room that never quite sleeps. She stirs the brazier, adds a small coal, and the warmth uncurls. The cat, sovereign of naps, opens one eye, then another, and hops lightly to Mara's feet, seeking the day's first morsel. The apprentices rise with the light. Caro stretches, the way a person does who has slept in an unfamiliar bed and found it hospitable. Jonah stands, rubs the sleep from his eyes, and for a minute looks at his hands with something like pride. The resin has dried into a thin, translucent seam that plays with the morning's soft light. They move through a quiet morning sequence, sweeping, rinsing, placing the mended bottles back where they once lived. The cracked flask is at the center of this return. Its ring has held. The silvered line reflects the new day like a small, bright ridge. Mara holds it to the light and turns it slowly. The apprentices watch, and in their gaze there is a shared hush, the hush of a lesson learned in the round. The traveler wakes to the smell of fresh porridge and the sound of a kettle lifting to sing. They wrap themselves in the elder's spare shawl and sit at the counter where they had once cradled their tea. The shop is different in daylight, the amber glow replaced by a clearer, kinder light that shows labels plainly and reveals the neatness beneath the night's cozy clutter. Outside, the lane has dried to a pewter gloss. Puddles keep small, reflective memories of the awnings. The traveler eats in small bites, offering stories between them like carefully placed coins. They speak of a village beyond the ford and a friend who keeps bees, a route that takes the long way round. Their voice is calm, the sort that has carried distance. When the time comes for departure, there is no formality. The traveler folds their cloak and lifts their case. They tie it with the silk Mara had chosen before, and in doing so mirror the care they received. Before they step out, they pause and place the dried sprig and the folded coin into Mara's hand. For the kettle, they say, and their smile is like a small sunrise. Mara accepts with a small nod. The exchange is a continuing of the night's quiet economy. Hospitality repaid, not as a debt, but as a conversation that will continue on other days. The shop watches them go. Their figure moves into the light, and for a moment the street catches them like a photograph. A silhouette, a small case, a coat damp at the hem. The bell above the door gives a faint farewell note as it settles. The cat lifts its head as if to mark the leaving. Then the door is still, and the shop turns back to its own immediate world. Labels, stoppers, a brazier that still glows. Tools put away with the ritual of hands that have done honest work. There is work to finish, of course. The threshold receives its last smoothing. Tom uses his plane with the gentleness of a man who knows the sound of well-done wood. Caro polishes the shelves where small fingerprints remain. Jonah wipes the counter until the wood reads warm rather than oily. In doing so, he leaves behind a faint trail of a night's company. The elder wraps the remaining plums, and the herb woman returns to the back to check on a jar of tincture left to settle. The day's tasks spread themselves into an order that makes sense. Small repairs that were started will be completed. Some tasks deferred to another evening when hands are rested and the shop is fuller. Mara performs her own small closing ritual. She walks the room with a cloth, touching the lip of each bottle with the same kindness one might pay to someone waking. She checks the brazier's coal and adds a flake of resin to scent the room so arrivals later that day will find it calm. The hourglass is turned again, this time as a reminder to herself. A few more minutes to settle, to breathe, to note. She arranges a kettle to sing at mid-afternoon in case a neighbor cannot make their own brew. These acts are not grand. They are what keep the place from becoming merely a shop. They make it a convening point for small human economies. Jonah and Caro sit for a while after the bustle. They pass a cup between them, neither saying much. The apprentices share a look that passes without speech, an understanding that they have, together, completed something that is not frivolous. Jonah shows Caro the fine line of resin on the mended bottle and points out the way the light plays along the silvered ring. Caro runs a thumb across the new threshold board and smiles, the sort of quiet smile that says, "I can do this." It is a small victory, but properly celebrated in the shop's way. The elder returns the empty jar to Mara with a half-joke about how plums in that jar could make one forgive a misstep in knitting. Her voice is a soft bell, and when she talks, she scatters little lessons like seeds. She mentions, in passing, that visible mending is a kindness. A thing with a seam tells the world it has been loved enough to be kept. The apprentices take this as gospel. The herb woman knots a length of twine into a bundle for the shelf. The neighbor with the oddments pops in to reclaim the brass hoop's mate and leaves with a wink. By mid-morning, the shop's rhythm settles into a comfortable, steady pace. Customers come and go. A neighbor wanting a tincture for a winter cough. A young woman requesting a bottle to hold a scent she cannot quite name. A child peering in at the rows of glass with eyes wide as if each bottle contained its own small moon. Mara helps each in turn with the practiced economy of someone who knows the difference between tending a thing and indulging a wish. She offers a measured cup of tea, and when asked about the night's repairs, she says nothing spectacular. She lets the visible repairs speak. There are small decisions to be made, too. Whether to fit a second layer of canvas on the awning, whether to source a finer sulfur for the resin. These are the kinds of choices that will stretch into the coming weeks, dragged along familiar paths like a cart with small wheels. Tom suggests a supplier in a neighboring town, and the herb woman offers to bring a sprig of bay when she goes next market day. All of them participate in the gentle economy of a community that invests in its own continuity. As the day draws towards its slanting afternoon light, Mara stands at the counter and looks toward the window. The patched awning throws its warmer shade across the threshold, and the flasks along the nearest shelf catch and scatter the light into small, deliberate jewels. The shop breathes, not the unsteady gasps of a place that is merely surviving, but the slow, contented exhale of a house that knows its shape. Mara reaches for the hourglass once more, turns it, and watches the sand settle in a steady run. It is a quiet measurement, the kind that measures intention more than minutes. Before she closes for a short rest, Mara takes a moment to write a small note and tuck it under a jar lid. If you're passing, drop a coin for the kettle. It is not a request so much as a polite invitation into the same kind of mutual care she has always practiced. She pins the note to the wall where the light will reach it. The apprentices sit and listen as she tells them, in a manner that is neither sermon nor lecture, about the shape of mending. We make places where things can be given back, she says softly. We keep what is worth keeping, and we learn how to do it with honesty. There is a lull that afternoon. The bell is quiet. The cat stretches and hides under a shelf with the solemnity of a creature that believes in long naps. The shop's sound palette narrows, a low hum of the distillation apparatus, the distant chuckle of footsteps on wet stone outside, the occasional clink as a bottle shifts its position. Mara sits with Jonah and Caro and shows them again how to rewrap a fragile parcel for the road. Her hands move slowly, deliberately. She ties the knot with an economy of motion that makes each loop a small, exact art. When the time comes to close the shutters for the evening, The town outside is already casting its long blue shade. The shop's lamps are lit with a methodical hand, their flames trimmed to a gentle point. They leave the brazier low, and a small light in the front window burning as a courtesy for those who travel late. Mara lingers for a moment with the door open, feeling the soft press of air, and listening to the rain begin again in a distant promise. She secures the latch, and the bell gives its small, familiar ring. Night returns, not as a simple repetition, but as a deeper held shape. The apprentices tidy the counters and sweep the floor one last time. Jonah wraps the mended flask in its wool case and slides it into a shallow drawer set aside for objects left for collection. The traveler, whose footsteps had faded into the lane, had left instructions saying a friend might call for the bottle. The note had been tucked away beneath the jar lid like a small map. They work with the same care as earlier, hands remembering the night's choreography like a favorite song. Once the shop has its small order restored, Mara takes a moment at the back shelf where she keeps things that do not belong to the day's sales. A tin for spare matches, a candle with a braided wick, a little worn bell whose sound she favors. She lights the candle and walks the room with it, letting its light catch the labels, the glass, the seams. In this light, the men's look like silvered scars that catch rather than conceal. She passes each shelf with a fingertip and murmurs to the room, not unlike the small blessing offered in the hours before. It is a way of acknowledging the work and the hands that made it. Before she finally gives herself to sleep, Mara performs one small act for the apprentices. She teaches them a simple breathing exercise that ties the body to the shop's heartbeat. "Breathe with the room," she says. "Let the breath follow what you hear." She instructs them to inhale slowly as the rain strikes the window, a soft, steady intake, and to exhale with the hiss of the cauldron's steam, a long, even release. Inhale with the lamp's gentle voice. Exhale with the cat's warm purr. It is not a complex thing. It is a map for a body that has been moving all day to find stillness. She asks them to close their eyes and count with each breath. 1, 2, 3. Fill the lungs as if drawing in the room's warmth. Let it go as if offering it back. The apprentices comply, and for a few minutes they sit in the gentle darkness, the shop's sounds folding around them like a soft cloak. The hourglass, turned again, marks the measure. The breathing slows. Jonah's shoulders drop. Caro's face slackens into a look of deep contentment. The shop, too, seems to inhale and exhale in sympathy. At the very end, as the candles gutter to a hush and the last of the tea mugs cools, Mara addresses the listener as the room addresses a friend. "If you have stayed until now," she says in that intimate register reserved for those who have been present through ritual and repair, "carry this quiet with you. Let the sound of rain on glass mark the pace of your breath. Let the image of a patched curtain warm your chest like a small lamp." She guides the listener in one final, very gentle breath. Inhale as the rain lifts at the edge of the awning. Feel the coolness in the back of the throat. Hold for a moment as a lamp holds its flame in wind. Exhale slowly as the cauldron releases a curl of steam, and with it, any tightness you have carried. Repeat once, twice. Let the breaths become a little longer, a little softer. With each exhale, imagine the shop releasing you further from worry and closer to rest. Outside, the rain continues its slow, faithful conversation with the glass. Inside, flasks keep small secrets of light, and visible men's trace the story of hands that will return to this place. The lamp glows, and the brazier breathes its heat into the room. The cat purrs, steady as an old clock. Jonah and Caro find their blankets and settle. The elder hums a line of a song, and the herb woman tucks in a scrap of time for the morning's tea. If you are ready, let your eyes close now. Let your breaths match the shop's cadence. Slow, careful, deliberate. Imagine the small silver seam of a mended bottle catching the light, the patched awning throwing a warmer shade across a doorstep, the kettle's whisper in a room that knows your name without speaking it. The visitor leaves a coin and a note in thanks, and the shop keeps the coin not as a payment, but as a sign that someone traveled and was given rest. When your breathing has softened, and the world behind your eyelids begins to unfurl into rest, remember the shop one last time. The rows of flasks like patient witnesses, the soft hiss of steam, the lamp's circle of warmth. Let the sound of rain write letters across your roofs tonight, and let the memory of visible stitches remind you that some repairs are made not to erase the past, but to honor it. If this night has eased your shoulders and quieted your mind, stay with us again for another evening like this. Follow for more gentle nights, more small repairs, and the slow, comforting rhythm of a place that tends. Sleep well, and let the potion shop's steady breath carry you into a deep, gentle rest.